My son-in-law announced to a room full of executives that I was basically a charity case. He didn't know I was the silent investor who kept that very company alive during its worst year. But when the CEO walked in and rushed straight toward me, my son-in-law realized, too late, that he had just mocked the man who secretly held his future in his hands. Hit subscribe if you believe life always finds a way to balance the scales, because this story proves it. My name is Daniel Hale, and for most of my life, I never cared about money in the way people expect. I grew up during a time when a man's value was measured by the steadiness of his hands, the honesty of his work, and the way he raised his family. My wife, God rest her soul, believed the same. But the world has shifted, and somewhere along the line, people like my daughter's husband, Mark Stevens, convinced themselves that money determines human worth, and that belief, ignorant, fragile, and loud, eventually shoved my family into a storm no one saw coming. I first met Mark 8 years ago when my daughter, Emily, brought him home for Thanksgiving. He walked in with a firm handshake, a crisp suit, and the kind of smile that tells you he's selling something, even when he isn't. I didn't dislike him at first. He said the right things, laughed at the right jokes, and even offered to help with the dishes after dinner. But there was something in his eyes, something hard, calculating, always scanning the room like he was measuring what everyone was worth. Back then, I chalked it up to youth. My daughter was happy, and that alone was enough for me. If she wanted to marry a man who wore a $10,000 watch but forgot her birthday once, that was her choice. But over the years, little cracks began to show. It started with subtle comments. Maybe one day you'll upgrade your truck, Daniel. Or, I can help you optimize your finances if you want. I know retirement funds can be confusing. Then it escalated. You really should let Emily and me take over decision-making. It's stressful for you to keep up with bills at your age. And the worst one. Don't worry, Emily. I'll make sure you don't end up like your dad. Struggling. I wasn't struggling. I lived simply, by choice. The house was paid off. The car ran fine. I had no debt. But in Mark's world, if it wasn't shiny branded or impossibly expensive, it was worthless. I didn't respond to his jabs. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't want to embarrass my daughter. She defended me sometimes, but other times she stayed quiet, eyes down, breathing small. It hurt more than I let on. One chilly November morning, I got a call from Emily inviting me to a dinner event at Mark's investment firm. It's their annual recognition night, she said. Spouses and family members are coming. Mark thought you should come too. Her voice wavered a little, as if unsure of what she was asking. I wondered if Mark really wanted me there, or if she was trying to include me despite him. Still, a father doesn't refuse his daughter lightly. I'd love to, I said. But 2 hours later, Mark called me himself. Hey, Daniel, he said, his tone overly polite. About that dinner. Are you sure it's something you want to attend? It's a bit upscale. I don't want you to feel out of place. There it was again. That voice that tried so hard to sound helpful, but dripped condescension like a leaky faucet. I let him talk until he ran out of air. I'll be there, I said calmly. Oh, he replied, surprised. All right then. Just dress nice. It's a high-profile event. I'll figure it out, I told him. After hanging up, I sat in my quiet living room listening to the old clock ticking on the wall. It had been years since anyone talked to me with so little respect. In my work, men younger than Mark used to stand straighter when I entered a room. They listened. They asked questions. They valued my insight. But Mark didn't know that man. He only saw an aging father, in-law in worn-out jeans and well-used boots. And that was fine. People like him never look past the surface anyway. Later that evening, I received a text from an unknown number. Looking forward to seeing you at the event, Mr. Hale. It's been too long. AG. AG. It had been years since I'd heard from those initials. My heart tightened, not in fear, but in the heavy way memory sometimes grips you. There were only a handful of people who still called me Husser, Hale, instead of Daniel, and even fewer who had reason to message me before a major corporate gathering. I stared at the message for several minutes before putting the phone down and making myself tea. Memories of another life, one I had stepped away from for good reasons, crowded the edges of my mind. I set them aside. Tonight was about my daughter, not old ghosts. The day of the event arrived with gray clouds and light rain. I dressed in a suit I had worn only 3 times in the past decade, but it still fit well. A simple dark navy jacket, pressed shirt, and polished shoes. Nothing fancy, but clean, dignified, and comfortable. Emily and Mark came to pick me up. Emily's eyes lit up when she saw me, and she hugged me tightly. "Dad, you look great," she said. Mark looked me over with a quick, shallow glance. "Oh, you cleaned up," he said, sounding relieved. "Good. The partners can be judgmental." I didn't reply. The venue was at a luxury hotel downtown, a giant glass structure glowing gold and white against the rainy evening. Expensive cars lined the valet entrance. Sleek Teslas, polished Mercedes, a few European models I didn't recognize. Mark stepped out of the car straighter than usual, chest puffed slightly, as if coming home to his kingdom. Inside the lobby, people drifted around holding champagne flutes and laughing with polite stiffness. Men in tailored suits with watches that cost more than my first house. Women in gowns and jewelry sparkling under the chandelier light. Conversations hovered around market forecasts, tech investments, and mergers. I felt eyes shift toward me quick, assessing glances. Not judging, not yet, but curious. I wasn't dressed like a billionaire investor or a hedge fund partner. I looked like someone's father. And to these people, that meant ordinary. Mark placed a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Just stick close to me and Emily, all right? This isn't really your environment." I pulled away from his hand gently but firmly. "I'll be fine." He forced a smile and nodded, though discomfort flashed across his face. He was nervous, maybe about how I'd represent him, maybe about who might judge him for bringing someone average. He shouldn't have been nervous. At least, not for that reason. A server passed by with champagne. Mark grabbed one for himself and one for Emily, then turned to me. "Oh, they have beer at the bar if you want something you're used to." Emily shot him a glare. "Mark." "What?" "I just mean." He cut himself off with a shrug and took a long sip. "I didn't drink anything. I didn't want a foggy mind tonight." As we moved through the room, Mark introduced Emily to several colleagues, but introduced me only once. And even then, he did it quickly, like an obligation. Some people nodded politely. Others barely looked at me. One young man, maybe in his late 20s, stared at me a little too long, not in mockery, more like recognition. His eyes widened ever so slightly before he blinked it away and returned to his conversation. Interesting. Mark didn't notice. He kept leading us around like a host protecting his status. "Dad," Emily whispered at one point. "I'm really happy you came. I wouldn't miss it," I told her. She squeezed my arm tightly. Then came the moment that set everything in motion. During a brief lull, Mark was speaking to a small group, 3 coworkers around his age, one older woman who looked like a senior partner, and 2 junior analysts. Emily and I stood just behind him. One of the junior analysts glanced at me and asked, "Oh, is that your father-in-law?" Mark laughed. Not a friendly laugh, a dismissive, boastful one. "Yeah," he said, "that's Emily's dad. Great guy, but not exactly familiar with this world." My daughter stiffened. Mark continued, He's on a fixed income, retired early. You know how that is. Tight budgets and all. But he means well. The group chuckled politely. I stood there, expression calm, though something inside me tightened. Emily's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. He's here because Emily insisted, Mark added, swirling his champagne. Otherwise, I'd have spared him the pressure of being around people who actually manage wealth. The senior partner raised an eyebrow. Mark. But he kept going. Hey, I'm just being honest, he said with a shrug. Some people are built for this world. Some aren't. You don't bring a bicycle to a race full of Ferraris. The group laughed again. Less naturally this time, but enough to sting. Mark didn't realize I was standing close enough to hear every word. Or maybe he did and didn't care. Emily tugged on his sleeve. Mark, stop. He waved her off. It's fine. Dad has a sense of humor, don't you? I looked directly at him, my voice steady. You're very confident tonight. He smirked. It's a big night for me. I'm up for a promotion. Pretty high, level position. Might even become one of the youngest VPs in the firm. His chest expanded. He looked proud of himself. He had no idea what was coming. Just then, my phone buzzed. Another message from the same unknown number. Almost there. Sit tight. AG. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. Emily leaned in. Everything all right? Everything's fine, I said. But inside, I felt a long, dormant part of myself stir. A quiet, watchful presence I hadn't needed in years. The part of me that used to sit in boardrooms, negotiate deals, and sign checks big enough to change the direction of companies. The part I'd walked away from. The part no one here knew existed. Not even Mark, especially not Mark, and he was about to find out exactly who he had been mocking. The ballroom lights dimmed as everyone began taking their seats. A soft, golden glow spread across the tables, and servers moved gracefully between guests, carrying trays of wine and appetizers. Emily and I sat at the table assigned to Mark's team, a round table near the center of the room. Mark sat between us, positioning himself so he faced the stage, clearly imagining himself up there soon, being praised, applauded, admired. He leaned toward me. Try to just observe tonight, okay? Don't talk too much. Some of the people at this table are important. Emily shot him a disgusted look, but I kept my expression still. There was no reason to argue. Not yet. Across the table sat the young analyst, who'd seemed to recognize me earlier. He offered a small, respectful nod. I nodded back, and a flicker of uncertainty crossed Mark's face, as though he sensed something but couldn't place it. Before any of us could say more, the senior partner, her name was Linda, tapped her glass and smiled, addressing the group. Before the event officially begins, I just want to express appreciation to everyone at this table for your hard work this year. Mark immediately straightened, puffing himself up like a rooster preparing for a photo shoot. Linda continued, and I'm glad to see families here. It reminds us why we work as hard as we do. She looked at me kindly. Mark clearly expected her to move on, but she didn't. Mr. Hale, she said, it's wonderful to meet you. Emily's spoken about you before. Several heads turned toward me. Emily smiled shyly. She rarely talked about family in these circles. Mark looked tense, probably hoping I wouldn't embarrass him. I nodded politely. Thank you, Linda. It's a pleasure to be here. But before anything more could be said, one of Mark's colleagues, Ethan, a tall man with a trimmed beard and too much cologne, leaned forward. So, Daniel, what do you do? Or sorry, he added quickly, what did you use to do? That kind of question is never asked out of true curiosity. It's a status probe. I've retired, I said. Oh, Ethan said, nodding as though he had predicted that. Makes sense. Mark chimed in, laughing lightly. Daniel was a small-scale consultant. Nothing in finance. I felt Emily's hand tense on her lap. Really? Ethan asked with a smirk. Like local businesses. Retail. Logistics. Mark answered before I could. Hard to explain. But let's just say he never had to deal with large numbers. Nothing like this world. He motioned around the extravagant room. Ethan nodded approvingly. Got it. I understood the game being played. Mark wanted to shine, and in his mind, the only way to shine brighter was to dim everyone around him. Especially me. Another analyst, Kimberly, sipped her drink and asked, "So, Daniel, were you excited to come tonight? Or did Emily have to drag you?" Mark snorted. "Oh, trust me, he's way out of his element here." Emily stiffened. "Mark, that's enough." He waved her off. "I'm joking." "Relax. Everyone knows I'm messing around." But no one at the table looked amused. Not really. They looked uncomfortable. Some looked embarrassed. Only Ethan seemed entertained. The young analyst, his name tag read Jason, spoke softly. "Actually, I'm glad you're here, sir." There was sincerity in his tone. I tilted my head. "Thank you, Jason." Mark shot him a sharp look. "Why?" Jason shrugged. "I've just heard things." Mark frowned, confused and irritated. "Heard what?" Jason hesitated. "Nothing bad, just stories." Mark scoffed. "Stories? About him?" He jerked a thumb in my direction. "Come on, Jason. Don't mess with me." Jason didn't respond, but his eyes flicked toward me again with that same quiet recognition. Mark didn't see it, or maybe he refused to see it. The conversation moved on to market performance, potential mergers, and predictions for the coming quarter. Mark dominated the discussion, tossing out jargon to prove his intelligence. Occasionally he'd pause to ask if I was following along, the way a teacher might talk to a slow student. I kept my posture calm, hands folded, expression neutral. Inside, I felt something else, a subtle electricity in the air. A sense of timing, like the build-up before a storm breaks. Eventually, a man in his 40s came by to greet the table. He shook the hands of the analysts first, then Linda's. When he got to me, he paused. His eyebrows lifted a fraction, as if he recognized me, but he said nothing. Only offered a polite nod. Mark whispered under his breath, "That's the CFO. Don't bother him." The CFO left a moment later, but he glanced over his shoulder one last time. Not at Mark. At me. Emily noticed it too. She leaned toward me. "Dad, do you know him?" "No," I said softly. "But he knows who I am." Before she could ask anything else, the lights dimmed again, and the speakers crackled as music faded. A host appeared on stage. "Welcome, everyone, to the Stevens and Gold Investment Annual Gala." Applause filled the room. Mark grinned broadly. "This is it," he whispered to Emily. "They're announcing promotions tonight." He adjusted his cufflinks, straightened his tie, and tried to calm his breathing. For once, his arrogance faltered, replaced by nervous excitement. I watched him with a mixture of pity and quiet certainty. He had no idea that the night he thought would elevate him would instead rewrite his entire understanding of the world. The host continued introducing the event, thanking various departments and team leaders. When Mark's team was mentioned, he sat taller, as if the spotlight was already warming his face. Then the host said, "Before our CEO arrives for the keynote speech, we want to highlight some exceptional contributions this year." Mark took a deep breath. Emily squeezed his arm, but the recognition went to someone else, an older partner nearing retirement. Mark clapped politely but stiffly, a forced smile on his face. Then came another recognition, and another. Each time Mark's shoulders sank a little more. Finally, the host said, "And now, please welcome our CEO, Mr. Alan Gregory." The room erupted into applause. Mark perked up. "The big moment," he whispered. But something strange happened. As the CEO walked in from the back of the room, he didn't go straight to the stage. He scanned the crowd, searching, Mark rose slightly from his chair, expecting acknowledgement. Expecting the CEO to look at him, maybe nod, maybe give him some subtle sign that tonight was his night. But the CEO's gaze passed right over him. Instead, Alan Gregory's eyes landed on me, and in that single moment, Mark noticed. The CEO's eyes widened with warmth and relief, the kind of expression you reserve for a mentor, a guardian. Someone who shaped your life when no one else believed in you. He stepped forward quickly, too quickly for someone running a billion-dollar investment firm. Conversations around us fell silent. Chairs paused mid-scoot. It was as if the entire room recognized something monumental was happening, even if they didn't yet understand what. Alan Gregory reached my table, stopped directly in front of me, and clasped my shoulder. "Daniel Hale," he said, voice thick with genuine emotion. "My God, it's been years." Mark froze. Emily blinked rapidly, stunned. Linda's jaw fell open. Ethan choked on his drink. Jason smiled knowingly. And Mark stared at me as if seeing me for the very first time. "Sir," the CEO continued, "I can't believe you're here. You should have told me you were coming." "I didn't want to make a fuss," I said calmly. Alan laughed, shaking his head. "You never do. Still the same man who saved this company when everyone else was ready to abandon ship." Gasps whispered around the table. Alan leaned in. "Please tell me we can talk after my speech. We have so much to catch up on." "Of course," I said. He squeezed my shoulder again, nodding deeply, almost respectfully, before heading toward the stage. The room watched him go with astonished eyes, whispering to one another. But no one's reaction compared to Mark's. His face had drained of color. His body had stiffened like a statue carved from pure panic. He swallowed hard, voice barely a whisper. What did he mean by save the company?" Emily turned to me slowly, eyes wide. "Dade, what's going on?" I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was about to unfold in ways none of them could predict. And Mark, who had spent years belittling me, mocking me, dismissing me, was about to learn exactly who I was, and what I truly owned. The room was still buzzing after Alan Gregory took the stage, but not with excitement. This was a different kind of energy. Confusion. Shock. Curiosity. People whispered behind hands, leaned toward colleagues, exchanged sharp glances. They weren't talking about the keynote address. They were talking about me. Mark sat stiffly, hands clenched under the table. Emily kept looking between him and me, trying to piece together a puzzle she didn't even know existed until a few minutes ago. On stage, the CEO began his speech. He talked about the company's growth, achievements, future, and challenges ahead. But Mark wasn't listening. His eyes remained glued to me as if I might suddenly disappear and prove this was some elaborate hallucination. At one point, I felt his stare so intensely I turned to him. His voice shook. How do you know the CEO?" I didn't answer immediately. I watched Alan on stage, remembering the young, desperate man he had been 15 years earlier. The man who had come into my office with a folder full of dreams and a failing company begging for one last chance. Finally, I looked at Mark. "We'll go back a long way." Mark blinked rapidly. You said you were a consultant." I replied. "But you didn't say you worked with them." "You never asked," I said simply. He opened his mouth, closed it, and stared at the tablecloth as though it would offer him answers. Jason, the young analyst, leaned forward quietly. "Sir, if I may ask, are you the Daniel Hale?" Mark turned sharply to him. "What does that mean?" "What Daniel Hale?" Jason swallowed. "The one who put up the capital that kept this firm alive in 2008. The silent partner. The Hale Investment Group guy." Emily's breath caught. "Dad." Mark whipped his head around to me, face white. "You're not." Before he could finish, Jason answered for me with the tone of someone speaking about a legend. He was the reason the company didn't go under. Everyone in senior management knows the story. Alan worked under him before the firm expanded. Mr. Hale basically built the foundation. The table went dead silent. Emily stared at me with trembling lips. Dead, why didn't you tell me? Because, I said softly, I never wanted my money to change who you were. Her eyes filled with tears, but not from hurt, from something like awe. Then Mark spoke again, his voice cracking. You own part of the company. I didn't even get a chance to answer, because at that exact moment, Alan finished his speech, stepped off stage, and walked directly toward our table again. This time the room quieted even more, because now everyone was paying attention. He approached with a warm smile. Daniel, would you come with me for a moment? There's someone who'd like to see you. I rose calmly. Emily touched my arm. Dad, can I come? Not yet, Alan said gently. You'll understand soon. I followed Alan out of the ballroom, feeling every pair of eyes settle on my back as we walked. In the hallway, his facade cracked. His formal CEO tone melted away, replaced by genuine emotion. Daniel, he said quietly, why didn't you tell me you were here? I would have arranged a private meeting room, a car, something. That would defeat the purpose, I said. I wanted to see the company from the same level everyone else does. He nodded, but guilt flickered behind his eyes. I should have recognized you right away. You did, I replied. Just needed a second. He let out a relieved laugh. Then his expression grew serious. There's an issue we need to talk about. It concerns one of our junior VPs, Mark. Yes. Alan exhaled heavily. He's been on my radar for a while. Something about him never felt right. Arrogant, dismissive of colleagues, cut corners. But recently, internal financial controls flagged some irregularities in his department. I said nothing, but felt my jaw tighten slightly. We launched a quiet review. Alan continued, and what we've found so far doesn't look good. There are discrepancies between client reports and internal records. He paused. Your son-in-law has been moving numbers around. I stayed silent. I wanted to talk to you before we escalate it, he said. I know he's family, and I respect you more than anyone in this business. I looked down the hallway where distant laughter from the ballroom drifted toward us. Mark had buried himself deep in a world he didn't truly understand, chasing status he thought would make him important. Show me the discrepancies, I said. Alan led me to a private office where two senior analysts stood waiting. They greeted me respectfully, too respectfully for an ordinary guest. They laid out documents, spreadsheets, screenshots. Mark had rerouted small funds from one account to another, adjusted projections to boost performance numbers, and padded reports to clients to make himself look like a prodigy. Not enough to bankrupt the company, but enough to get him fired, and possibly charged. When they finished, Alan sat beside me. We can handle it however you choose. But Daniel, if you decide to let him fall, he will fall hard. I closed the binder gently. I want to speak to him first. Alan nodded. I thought you might. When I returned to the ballroom, people straightened in their seats, their eyes trailing me like I carried a crown they hadn't seen before. Emily rushed over. Dad? Are you all right? I'm fine, I said. Mark stood slowly. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last 30 minutes. Sweat dampened his collar, and his hands shook slightly. Daniel, he said shakily. I'm sorry if I just didn't know. You didn't ask, I said again. He swallowed hard. What's happening? Why did the CEO take you out? What's going on? I glanced at Emily. Sweetheart, would you mind giving us a moment? She hesitated. Her eyes were scared, confused, overwhelmed, but she nodded and stepped back. Mark and I walked toward a quiet corner of the ballroom. His eyes darted nervously between me and the exit, like a man trapped underwater looking for air. "Daniel," he whispered, "I didn't mean any of it. The jokes, the comments. I thought you were beneath you," I asked. "No, His voice cracked. "I just wanted to fit in. People here respect money. They respect success. I thought if I acted like I had it all together, they would take me seriously. And belittling others helps with that?" His face twisted with guilt. "I know I messed up. I know I shouldn't have talked to you that way. I swear, I never meant to hurt Emily." I didn't answer. Instead, I asked, "Mark, do you know what company you really work for?" "What do you mean?" he asked, trembling. "You work for the company I invested in. At the time, I owned more than half of it. I stepped back so Alan could lead it. But I never stopped watching." His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "And your performance this year?" I added quietly. "The irregularities in your reports." Mark went pale. You know about that?" "I do." He sank into a chair, hands shaking violently. "I didn't steal. I didn't take money. I just shifted numbers to look better, to get promoted, to show Emily I'm not a loser." The admission hung in the air like a confession at a funeral. "I can fix it," he said desperately. "I can correct the reports. I'll work overtime. I'll do whatever it takes. Please, don't let them fire me. Emily will leave me if I lose this job. I know she will." He was crumbling, completely. And yet, this moment was necessary. The mighty man who mocked me, belittled me, treated me like an embarrassment, was now begging for the very grace he had never shown anyone else. I looked down at him, seeing not arrogance anymore, but a scared young man suffocating under his own insecurity. "Mark," I said, "your future depends on what you choose to do next." He stared up at me, eyes red, hands trembling, breath uneven. What do I have to do?" he whispered. Mark didn't sleep the night the investigation officially began. And honestly, neither did I. Even though I had no active role in the company anymore, just a silent ownership stake, I still felt responsible for what would happen next. My daughter, Emily, hadn't said a word to me for 2 days. She wasn't angry. She was processing. The truth about her husband was unfolding too fast for her to catch her breath. The firm launched the internal audit at 8:00 a.m. sharp. Mark had already been placed on temporary suspension pending review, which was corporate language for "don't come near the office unless we invite you," and they weren't going to invite him. He sat on the couch in my living room, hunched over, his hands rubbing together. It was the first time I had ever seen him look small. Not embarrassed, not annoyed, just small, like a boy who'd been caught forging a parent's signature on a school test. Emily sat beside him, arms crossed, staring ahead. She looked exhausted. The silence stretched long enough to make the room feel thick. Finally, Mark spoke. "I messed up." Those 3 words didn't even begin to cover it. I didn't respond. I wanted him to keep talking. He took a shaky breath. "I know I'm responsible. I shouldn't have talked to you the way I did. I shouldn't have, any of it." Emily closed her eyes as if the words stung. "And I know you don't owe me anything," he continued, his voice cracking. "But I need help. They think I stole money." I rested my elbows on my knees, my hands folded. "Did you?" He swallowed hard. "Not intentionally." That wasn't an answer, and he knew it. Emily turned her head, staring at him with wide, cold eyes. "Mark, what does that mean?" He covered his face with both hands. "I juggled some things around. Moved funds. It wasn't for me. It was to cover a deal that fell through. I didn't want to look incompetent. And instead you ended up looking guilty," she whispered. Mark didn't argue. He looked shattered, but I knew better than to trust emotion at face value. Guilt didn't automatically mean redemption. Tears didn't equal accountability. But I also remembered something else. A ruthless man doesn't cry because he got caught. He scrambles to deflect blame. A good man who messes up and is terrified of losing the people he loves, he breaks. Mark looked broken. "This is going to get worse," I said quietly, "and you need to be completely honest with me. All of it. Every detail." He nodded, wiping his eyes. "I will." For the next 30 minutes, he walked us through the financial movements he'd made. He wasn't stealing. He wasn't pocketing money. But he was shifting investment capital in ways he had no authority to do. He was trying to look like a star producer, trying to be the high-performing son-in-law, trying to prove himself in a company he didn't know I had built. He wasn't malicious. He was insecure. And insecurity, when mixed with ambition, is the fastest way to blow up a career. When he finished explaining, the house fell quiet again. Emily was crying quietly. Mark stared at the floor. "What happens now?" Emily whispered, and that question, more than anything, landed on my shoulders, because I suddenly realized something important. I wasn't deciding Mark's fate. I was deciding Emily's future. If Mark was fired with cause, he would never work in finance again. A man who mismanaged funds, even without personal gain, could be blacklisted overnight. Their mortgage depended on his income. Their lifestyle did too. Their entire marriage's foundation was about to be shaken, and I could either steady it or let it fall. But then a darker thought slipped in. Maybe letting it fall was the right thing. Mark had treated me like I was beneath him. He humiliated me. He belittled my daughter's family background. He mocked a man who built the life he envied. And now he wanted my help. "Dad," Emily asked softly, her voice breaking. "What do you think?" I didn't answer right away. I stood, walked to the kitchen, and filled a glass of water just to have something to do. I stared out the window at the yard I had maintained for 30 years. Life looked normal out there. Birds on the fence. My old tools hung neatly in the shed. If someone walked by, they would never guess that inside this quiet home, lives were splitting at the seams. When I returned to the living room, I didn't sit down. "I can talk to the CEO," I said finally. "But I won't lie, and I won't manipulate the truth." Mark nodded vigorously. "Of course, I don't want you to lie. But," I continued, "I won't defend you if you don't take responsibility. No excuses. No minimizing." He closed his eyes. "I understand. And I want one thing from you." He looked up. Emily looked up too. "I want you to tell Emily everything you've ever hidden from her about money, your work, your mistakes. Everything you were too proud to admit. Everything you've pretended to be." Emily grabbed a tissue, wiping her face. "Dade, you can't build a marriage on an image," I said gently. "She deserves the truth, whether this company forgives you or not." Mark looked at his wife. Really looked at her. And in that moment, I believe he understood, for the first time, how deeply his pride had wounded her. "I'll tell you everything," he whispered. And he did. For the next 2 hours, Mark laid out years of insecurity. How he grew up in a wealthy family that constantly compared him to his cousins. How he always felt like he needed to prove himself through money, status, career. How marrying Emily, who came from a modest background, put a chip on his shoulder he didn't know how to shake. How he resented feeling judged by coworkers for having a wife who didn't fit their lifestyle mold. How he projected all of that onto me because I was an easy target. By the end, my daughter was weeping silently, and Mark was out of words. "Thank you," I said softly, "for telling the truth." He nodded, defeated. I took a long breath. "I'll talk to the CEO tomorrow." Mark looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. But I'm not saving your job, I added. He stiffened, panic setting in. Emily reached for his hand. I'm not saving your job, I repeated, because that job was hurting you. It was feeding the parts of you that lie, hide, and pretend. It was turning you into someone who looks down on people he loves. And that isn't a life I want for my daughter, or for you. He swallowed, trembling. Then what are you going to do? I'm going to tell the truth, every bit of it, and I'm going to suggest something else. His eyes darted nervously. What? I'm going to recommend you be given a chance to pay back losses, rebuild your reputation, and train under someone who doesn't care about flash, someone who cares about discipline and long-term skill. Mark blinked, confused. Ooh. I gave him a small smile. Me? Emily gasped. Mark stared at me like he didn't understand the words. You want me to work for you? No, I said. I want you to learn from me. It's not a job. It's guidance. I want you to learn money the way I learned it. Quietly, patiently, without the noise of competition. He wiped his eyes again. You'd do that? Even after everything? I took a slow breath. You hurt my pride, but you hurt my daughter's heart. And that matters more than anything. If helping you grow means protecting her future, then yes, I'll do it. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, sobbing quietly. These weren't the tears of manipulation. They weren't theatrical. They were the kind that shake a man from the inside out. Emily walked over to me and hugged me tightly. Thank you, Dad, she whispered against my shoulder. I rested my hand on her back. Make sure he earns this. I will, she whispered. When she returned to Mark's side, something in the room shifted. Not instantly, not magically, but the tension loosened. The walls between them lowered. For the first time in years, they looked like a married couple fighting together instead of against each other. Tomorrow, the company would hear the truth. Tomorrow, a man's career would fall apart so a better one could begin. Tomorrow, I would stop being a silent partner and become something else entirely, a mentor, a father-in-law, and the man who would finally show Mark what real wealth looked like. The next morning, I walked into the investment firm for the first time since the gala. Without Mark beside me, the energy felt different. No smug smiles, no forced politeness, just a quiet tension that told me the rumors had spread. The receptionist's eyes widened when she saw me. Mr. Hale, they're expecting you. Of course they were. The CEO, Daniel Merrick, met me at his office door. His posture, usually relaxed and confident, was stiff with concern. Thank you for coming, he said, ushering me inside. I nodded. Let's talk. We sat across from each other at a small conference table. He didn't waste time. We've reviewed enough of the files to understand the scope, Daniel said. Your son-in-law didn't steal a penny, but he did move funds into unauthorized portfolios to cover losses. That lines up with what he told me. Daniel assessed me, his brow tightening. We're prepared to terminate his employment. No lawsuit, no charges, just separation and permanent disqualification from managing accounts. I took a breath. I agree with the termination. He blinked, surprised. You do? I do, I said softly, because he was chasing a version of success that was killing him and hurting the people around him. Daniel leaned back, relieved and conflicted. Then what are you here to ask for? I want you to leave room for him to make things right. He folded his hands, which means allow him to reimburse the company over time. Let him rebuild his credibility, not as a financial manager, but as a disciplined learner. No titles, no authority, just accountability. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. I can support that. Your stake gives you the leverage to shape that outcome anyway. I glanced toward the window. It's not about leverage. It's about ensuring he becomes the kind of man my daughter can trust." Daniel's expression softened. Understood. The conversation lasted another hour. We formalized the terms. Mark would be dismissed respectfully. No public humiliation. No final strike that would haunt him for life. In return, he would acknowledge the misconduct, commit to repayment, and undergo guided training, but not under the company. Under me. As I left the office, the employees who had witnessed the gala avoided eye contact. Their silence wasn't cruel, it was embarrassed, remorseful. They had followed Mark's lead in laughing at me. Now they didn't know where they stood. I didn't blame them. Mockery spreads easiest in rooms where insecurity lives. When I reached home, Emily and Mark were waiting at the dining table. Emily looked anxious. Mark looked like he hadn't breathed since I left. I sat down across from him. "It's done," I said quietly. His shoulders fell in relief and dread. What did they say?" "You're being let go." Emily squeezed his hand. He nodded, swallowing hard. "But," I continued, "they won't sue you, and they won't blacklist you. You'll have the chance to repay what was lost, and after that, your future is your own." Tears filled his eyes, but he held them back this time. "And," I added, "you'll be working with me." He exhaled, overwhelmed. "I don't deserve that." "You're right," I replied gently. "You don't yet, but you can earn it." He looked up at me, really looked. Not the dismissive upward tilt he used to give when he thought he was above me. This time his eyes were full of humility. "What do I need to do?" he asked. "Start over," I said. "Learn the way I did. No bragging, no shortcuts, no pretending. Just discipline." He nodded, like the words pierced him and anchored him at the same time. Over the next weeks, Mark transformed in ways I didn't expect. He woke up early to meet me at my workshop, not the office. I taught him budgeting with pen and paper before algorithms. We discussed risk, not with graphs, but with the stories of people I'd known who lost everything because pride told them they were invincible. I showed him how wealth isn't the size of a paycheck, but the pattern of decisions. And slowly, he changed. He stopped bragging. He stopped comparing. He listened. He apologized. To me, to Emily, to himself. One morning, as we closed up the workshop, he handed me a folded piece of paper. His repayment plan. Detailed, humble, realistic, no excuses. No attempts to escape responsibility. I unfolded it, read it, and nodded. "This is good," I said. "Thank you for giving me a chance to earn your respect." He murmured. I put a hand on his shoulder. "Respect isn't given. It's built, and you're building it." He looked like the weight of years had lifted from him. Months passed. Emily and Mark grew closer. Their arguments shifted from accusations to conversations. Their home warmed in ways I hadn't seen since the early days of their marriage. Then one day, Daniel invited all shareholders to a small gathering. This time, I brought Mark, not as a son-in-law trying to impress anyone, but as a student learning humility. When we walked in, the room didn't stare at him with judgment. Only acknowledgement. He held his head high, not because he was proud, but because he was honest. Daniel approached him, extended a hand, and said, "Good to see you." Mark shook it without flinching. He had grown. At the end of the night, as we walked out, Mark paused at the entrance. "I used to think power was the ability to make people feel small," he said quietly. "But now I think real power is the ability to make people feel safe." I looked at him, this man who had once mocked me, who had once hidden behind arrogance. "You're finally becoming someone my daughter deserves," I said. He didn't cry. He didn't boast. He just nodded, deeply. And for the first time, I believed him. As we stepped into the cool night air, I remembered the moment he had publicly humiliated me. The moment he laughed at me, pointed out my old car, joked about my retirement checks. The moment I sat in painful silence, while he puffed up his ego at my expense. Now, as the doors of the firm closed behind us, I realized something. Some men learn through success, others through failure. Mark learned through facing the truth. And I, once the silent owner he mocked, had become the man who guided him out of the very pit he dug. Not because he deserved it, but because my daughter deserved a husband who knew the value of humility. And because sometimes, the greatest revenge is giving someone the chance to become better.